Good evening. My name is Natalie Turvey. I'm Executive Director of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. And on behalf of the CJF, thank you for joining us for this J-Talk on the state of media, survival strategies in the age of misinformation. It's wonderful to see a full room tonight, and it speaks to how important the future of quality journalism is to all of us in the room. I'd like to thank those who make our events possible, BMO Financial Group, our J-Talk series sponsor, and our thanks to Cision and CPAC, our in-kind supporters. If you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter tonight, you can do that using the hashtag CJFJTalk. With journalism being rocked by so many disruptive forces, whether it's pressure on publishers to find sustainable business models, or misinformation in all of its forms being fed by social media, or the general decline of trust in the press worldwide, we're thrilled to be joined by three of today's leading media thinkers to explore some of these issues and to offer up some solutions and some alternatives at a time when they're desperately needed. Your moderator for tonight's talk is the Columbia Journalism Review's chief digital writer, and he's been providing context about the intersection between media and technology since the start of the commercial internet. He's also a fixture at events around the future of journalism. Now, some of you might have heard of the actor David Hasselhoff. He used to do a show called Baywatch. And Knight Rider, if you're my vintage. But what you may or may not know is that he is massively popular in Europe. And when you cross the pond with Mathew Ingram, he is the Hoff of Canadian journalism. True story. I witnessed this phenomenon firsthand at a, where's Matthew's wife? Matthew's wife can back me up. I witnessed this phenomenon firsthand at a journalism festival in Perugia, Italy, and Mathew could not walk 2 feet without being approached by young journalists wanting to chat with him and grab a selfie. Hashtag I met Mathew Ingram from Twitter. And while I was late for a lot of my sessions and waylaid by Matthew's entourage, I was also absolutely thrilled to see one of our Canadian journalists and one we value celebrated abroad. Just a tip, if you're ever in Perugia in the spring, you can use Matthew's name to get into restaurants. So we are absolutely thrilled to have him lead the conversation tonight. Over to you, Mathew Ingram.
Thank you. That's not even close to being true, especially the restaurant part. So please don't try to do that. Anyway, welcome and thanks very much for coming. It's my pleasure to be here to have a discussion with three of the sharpest minds and in some cases sharpest tongues in journalism. Not going to mention any names. So I assume most of you have heard of Jeff Jarvis, but for the record, he's a professor at the Craig Newmark School of Journalism at the City University in New York. And he also runs the News Integrity Initiative, which is funded in part by Facebook. Jeff has been called the LeBron James of journalism, but not by me. It's true he is tall, but I think LeBron James is a bit of a stretch. So for more on that story, please see Natalie after the break. Vivian Schiller, you should probably know also by now, but in case you don't, she's a veteran of multiple news entities and having held senior management and/or CEO positions at the New York Times, NBC, NPR, and Twitter, before joining a new blockchain-powered startup called Civil, which I'm eager to ask her more about. Vivian is also part Canadian, with roots in Winnipeg, which is perhaps the most Canadian of cities, I think. And finally, Jay Rosen at the end.
Hi, everybody.
A veteran media thinker and professor at New York University, Jeff's crosstown rival, where he runs Studio 20 and the Membership Puzzle Project. He's currently advising The Correspondent, a Dutch news company that's bringing its membership model to the English-speaking world. Jay also knows all the great bars on the Lower East Side. So if you want to ask him about that later. I have lots of questions for our guests, and I hope you do too. There will be a question period later. We have a mic, so please get your questions ready.
No arguments.
The tougher, the better. No arguments, just questions.
Arguments are good. Arguments are good.
So, of all the questions I want to ask, I think the most urgent one has to go to Vivian. I hate to put you on the spot,
but go for it.
So Civil did a token sale. It didn't hit the target of 8 million. In fact, came up quite short. So I guess I'm wondering what happens now.
Do you think people know what Civil is?
Does everybody know what Civil is? Should we do a review?
Probably not.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us what it is first?
Okay, so I'll be brief, because
Okay.
one of the things that we get accused of is it's too complicated. So I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. So Civil is a startup, and our goal is to create a network, a global network of trustworthy news organizations. So that when you, and the network is owned and operated by the public, who support those news organizations and who manage the governance of that network in terms of making sure it stays free of bad actors. So that's effectively what Civil is. The mechanism for all of that is the blockchain and cryptocurrency, which I'm happy to go into later, but probably not.
If you could explain how the blockchain works.
I'm not going to try to explain how the blockchain works. So part of the initial launch strategy was to sell these tokens. It's a form of cryptocurrency called Civil, and we had set a floor of $8 million US dollars. We didn't hit that. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it, including the way that token sale was set up from beginning was
incredibly complicated.
Yes,
Did
not
anybody,
complicated.
did anybody
Wasn't
buy
their
any
fault.
tokens?
Yeah.
One?
Thank you. It's incredibly difficult to buy tokens, and but anyway, long story short, we didn't meet that soft cap, but it is. I have actually feel that it is a cathartic moment, because the whole focus on selling tokens, as opposed to the focus on what this network was about, was not the way to go. So I actually feel very encouraged that now we can take a fresh start. Cryptocurrency still plays a role, but the focus of what Civil is not about buying these tokens. They are just a means to govern the network. So we're going to take a breath. We're going to redo the token sale in a very, very, very different way. We're going to launch the network. We're going to support, and the main thing is, the whole point of this is we want to try to support news organizations, particularly small news organizations who are operating in the growing number of news deserts in North America and around the world, as well as to support news organizations that are covering topics that are undercovered. So I am ready. I am actually enthusiastically ready for the future. I have been accused of being a Pollyanna. I should say that right now, and an optimist, but I actually am feeling quite optimistic.
And you have newsrooms operating on Civil right now, right?
We
14
have,
or 15?
We have 14. We have now close to 20 newsrooms who are operating, and they're doing extraordinary work. We have supported a lot of them with initial grants in actual real money, or what they call in the blockchain world fiat currency, so jargon alert. So yeah, they're doing extraordinary work, and we want to increase that to many, many more through the Civil Foundation, which we can talk about later.
So the token sale not reaching its target doesn't mean that those newsrooms don't continue?
No, 100%.
Right. Okay.
No, 100%.
Because I know I talked to some people and they thought, oh, token sale didn't meet the target, that means the whole thing shuts down.
No.
And newsrooms don't go away.
No,
and,
nothing is shutting down.
Great. I'm wondering, why did you make the leap to Civil? What was it about it?
Me personally?
Yeah. What was it about it
Right.
that made you want to? I mean, you've had experience at a whole bunch of different traditional media entities, Twitter. What appealed to you?
Well, it was definitely not so I could get into the nitty gritty of the mechanics of how you buy tokens. I will tell you that right now. I still don't really understand. I don't completely understand it myself. The reason that I got into it, and as you mentioned, I've worked at a lot of news organizations, and I see the same things that I'm sure we're going to end up talking about in this panel about the really, at least from my perception, sort of the twin crises in journalism, which is the trust crisis and the financial sustainability crisis. I mean, there's a lot underneath. There's a lot inside each of those buckets, but together they are really catastrophic, not just for journalists, who cares about journalists, but for the information needs of communities. That's really what this is all about. So in looking across sort of the media landscape about where I could contribute, and having worked in a lot of big media companies and not really wanting to do that again for a whole bunch of reasons, when I first learned about Civil, I got actually quite excited about the fact that this was something new, this was something very hopeful. And actually, there's a guy in the back of the room who was one of the people that talked me into joining Civil. Daniel.
Put your hand up.
So it was really something that I felt like, wow, I want to be part of this. And I knew, as much as I didn't really understand blockchain, and I still don't understand blockchain very well, I know that blockchain is going to be a big part of the world, and which means there will be an intersection between blockchain and journalism. And I sure as heck, we're on television, wanted to be part of thinking through how that's going to work for journalism from the get-go instead of waiting until it's too late. So that was my primary motivation. And I thought I'd never, also, for all the big media companies I've been part of, I'd never been part of a startup before, and I wanted that experience, though I'm doing it sort of later in life than most people do.
And how's it going so far? Do you feel pretty good about it?
It's a blast. Yeah. I feel rejuvenated.
Great.
Yeah.
Jeff, you made a comment to the Wall Street Journal about Civil that I think you felt was sort of taken out of context. You were skeptical. The quote, I think, was that you didn't think it made any sense, the whole token sale or cryptocurrency.
Damned reporter.
Yeah. Do you want to elaborate at all?
Yeah, no, I was trying to take the reporter through my journey. I was very skeptical. I was, when my dean, Sarah Bartlett, went the first time, I thought she was smoking something, which you can do now here, I hear.
Yeah, totally legal, totally legal.
Nice. Yeah, it was good.
And
Feel
I didn't
free to
get
blaze
it.
it.
So I told Vivian I wanted to come over and be brainwashed. And I think I spent 2 hours sitting down and being brainwashed. And I still don't understand. I mean, I did the token sale the last hours, and it was, I was on a high wire act, and it was wildly complicated. None of this was Civil's fault.
Did you buy some?
I bought some. Less than I thought, because I didn't calculate in the transfer fees and all that. But I did, because I believe in it, and I think it's important. But I was on a journey there. And I didn't understand where the value was being created. I'm still a little rusty on that.
Okay.
But what got me excited was the opportunity to create a new currency to reward new behaviors. So I, believe it or not, think I haven't been nearly radical enough about the future of journalism and what it is. And I say that, I argue we're not in the content business, we're in the service business. We've got to understand how communities work. And we've got to operate differently about them. I'm excited about companies like Spaceship Media we can talk about, or others. So one thing about Civil that occurred to me was that you could use this currency to reward new behaviors. So imagine if in the newspaper forums you were able to reward someone with a fraction of a token for being a peacemaker, for adding value and reporting, for doing other things, right? And they could buy their membership or buy their subscription with that currency. You start to see an engine going over. So I see opportunity there, but I'm still confused. I still got a hell of a headache buying the tokens. But again, that was not Civil's fault. That was the token founder's fault. It's unproven. Vivian will be the first to tell you that. But we need new experiments. And so I wanted to try to convey that more nuanced view. And the other thing was, I think that there was some view, some questioning of the motives of the founders. They were trying to make a fortune off the tokens. Well, obviously they didn't.
Right.
And having met Mathew Isles, the founder, and having met the team, I have zero question of their good motives. In this, they care about journalism. And we all don't know what they have to do about journalism. So this is their effort, and it may or may not work, but we're all trying to do things to figure this mess out.
Jay, do you have any thoughts about blockchain or cryptocurrency you want to share?
Well, I admire Vivian for taking on this responsibility. I think we need people who have executive experience trying to find new forms of support for journalism. And I think it's really important that companies like Civil, who have a completely different idea about how the craft of journalism can be supported, are very important developments, and we should try and contribute to them. I was asked to be involved in a sort of an advisory capacity for Civil by the people who are organizing it. And I declined, partly because I'm doing something else, but also because I couldn't understand it myself. I couldn't explain it to somebody else. I didn't feel that I could be a part of it myself. So it was interesting, and Vivian and I had a conversation about that.
And that was before I started, yeah.
Yeah, that's another reason why I admire what you're doing, because you're walking into something that is a little hard to understand, even for us, and we study media, right? So there's that, and then it was clear to me that everyone was going to focus, just as you said, Vivian, on this token sale, because it's like a verdict, that you can say they met it or they didn't meet it. And I saw some headlines in the aftermath of that said that it was a complete bust, and it was like one headline called it a catastrophe. And
damn reporters.
And I thought, like,
damn headline writers.
Why was it a catastrophe? Why not just a failed experiment?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? Because it was that.
Or even just an ongoing experiment.
Yeah, or just an early experiment. Right, exactly.
And it did feel as though part of the problem was there was this hard end date, where we have to do
and
X
in fairness, I
by
think,
this time.
we are, set ourselves up for that.
Yeah.
And it was never the point. So anyway, now we get a fresh start.
So speaking of fresh starts, Jay, I wanted you to talk a little bit about The Correspondent, because I find them fascinating. I find what they're trying to do fascinating. I know that you do as well, and that a big part of sort of your thoughts about, I think what you've called a news organization optimized for trust came from seeing The Correspondent and how they behave. Can you talk a little bit about kind of who they are and why you're interested in them, why you're helping them?
Yeah, so I'm involved with a Dutch startup called The Correspondent. They are the world's most successful member-funded, ad-free news site. They have 61,000 members who pay 70 euros a year because they believe in it. They have no ads, no clickbait, no sponsors, no traffic goals, and 21 full-time correspondents and an equal number of support staff. And I knew about them 3-4 years ago, and I watched them as they continued to gain more and more members. And the more I looked at them, the more impressed I was, because they, in a sense, had started over in building a news company. And everything they did, they, as Mathew said, optimized for trust. So, as an example, no ads has a huge effect on your company. Because if you don't have ads, you don't have a third party in between the journalists and the readers. Another thing they do is they give all of their correspondents the freedom to define their own beats and assign themselves to their stories, because they want reporters to be committed to their subjects. And in exchange for this extraordinary freedom to choose your own beats and assign your own reporting projects, they require their correspondents to spend 30 to 40% of their time interacting with readers and members and treating them as a knowledge community, people who know things that are valuable that should be part of the journalism. And so members are not just financial supporters, they are participants in knowledge communities that are then connected to the beats of the reporters. And that's designed to make for better journalism, because you're drawing on a wider pool of knowledge, but it also makes for loyalty and trust, because the members are interacting with the journalists about the journalism they're doing. So the more I learned about this model, the more impressed I got. When they told me that they wanted to expand from Dutch and the Netherlands to English language publishing and the United States, I said, I will help you. And they were looking for a media partner, and they were going to partner with The Guardian, they were going to partner with Mother Jones or something like that. And none of that worked out, and I said to them, NYU will be your partner, and I will be your ambassador to the American market. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to bring The Correspondent to English language publishing, which is the largest market in the world. And we're going to attempt to adapt their model, which is working in one country, to another country. And just to wrap this up, membership is different than the three traditional models that have existed for supporting a news organization. The three traditional models are license fee, BBC, CBC, where the government mandates public support for news gathering and broadcasting. The advertising model, which everyone knows about, you can gain readers and viewers by putting on programs, and then you charge advertisers to reach them. And then the third model has always been subscription. And subscription is you pay directly for the product. Each of these models has advantages and disadvantages. Membership is a little different. In subscription, it's a product relationship.
It's like a transaction.
It's a
I
transaction.
give you money, you give me something.
Yeah, you pay your money, you get the product. Right. If you don't pay, you don't get it. Everybody knows that business very well. Membership is a little different. Membership is you join the cause because you believe in the work and the importance of that work. If you join the cause because you believe in the work, then you want the work to spread to others who may not be members. And the reason that's important is that it doesn't require a paywall.
Because it feels like a paywall, at least in many cases, you pay, you get the news, fine, that's good for you. Can't pay, you don't get any news. Maybe you get a story now and then, maybe there's a meter. But a membership feels like, and you and I think have talked about this before, part of the reason people become members and pay is so that other people can have that content for free.
Yes. And when my colleague and I went to the Netherlands to interview members of the Dutch Correspondent for 3 days to find out why they do this. And we spoke to maybe 60 of them. This isn't exactly what they said, but my interpretation of what they told us was the deepest reason that they are supporting this newsroom is because when they patronize and use the journalism that is made by the correspondent, they gain a feeling that the world has not gotten beyond us. Our problems are not completely unsolvable. We can still understand the world and figure out how to take action and fix it. And because that's the kind of journalism the correspondent specializes in. And the restoration of that feeling that we haven't quite lost control. We still can, in the way that journalism was always supposed to be, understand our problems, make decisions, fix them, improve our lives.
And we should point out they don't do news like breaking news.
They don't do breaking news. They do in-depth investigative journalism about problems and causes of problems, and they feel that your story is incomplete if it doesn't include what can we do about this? What can I do as an individual? What can we as a society do? And it's that approach to journalism that restored people's faith that journalism can actually be part of a functioning democracy, as opposed to just a bid for your attention, controversy of the day, culture war fought out through news headlines. And so that was very inspiring, and it motivated me to work as their advisor in their expansion for free.
Great. Well, and I'm sure people will have more questions later, hopefully, about that. It's a fascinating model, I think. And certainly the way they look at their readers as sort of participants is a fascinating, because typically media is not so great at doing that.
That's something I've been interested in for 20 years. I've been advocating for it for 20 years, and more than anyone else, they have put that into practice. And they're all half my age, which is fun. It's fun to work with young people.
And tall and good looking, because they're Dutch.
It's funny how that happens more and more.
Yeah, right. Something's changing.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So we should probably get to misinformation. So Jeff, I'm going to turn to you. I think
I'll tell a few lines.
that came out wrong.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, certainly myself included, look at Facebook in particular as a sort of engine of misinformation. Look at in some ways, almost a algorithmically driven sort of machine for confirmation bias and fake news and misinformation. And so I wonder whether, obviously they're trying to do something about that since the congressional hearings and so on. Do you think that they're a big part of the problem? And if so, are they doing the things that they need to do? Or is it our problem? Is it a human problem? And they're just an engine for it?
So full disclosure is that I raised money for my school, not only from Craig Newmark, that's our new name, but also from Facebook, the Ford Foundation, and others. I'm independent of Facebook. I receive no money personally from them. End of disclosure. I, like Vivian, I'm an optimist. And I believe that we are, I'll spare you my full Gutenberg timeline. But yeah, we are very early.
We don't have enough time.
We are very early. It would take Vivian longer to describe the blockchain.
Yeah.
We're very early in this transition. People think it's happening very quickly. It's happening very slowly. We don't know what the net is yet. It is too soon, in my view, to define it and limit it and regulate it according to old presumptions. We are making a lot of presumptions right now that are more emotional than anything else. Rasmus Kleist-Nielsen, who's brilliant, who just took over the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford, just yesterday was tweeting this presumption that we're all in a filter bubble, right? We all presume we're in a filter bubble. All the research Rasmus has, and he'll give you the links to all of them, say actually we're not.
Right.
I got into a little Twitter fit this afternoon. It's one of
you?
The things. What?
I find that hard to believe.
Before the plane, it's almost the plane door closes. You think, should I tweet that or not? Where a Wall Street Journal reporter said, "Can we all agree that Facebook is bad for society?" And in the end, I said, "What hubris that is to think that he knows better than 2 billion people." Right? And a discussion ensued, of course. And we think that we're in
Did you win, or?
I always think I do. That's all you need to do. And I think that we have problems, but the problems are not yet well defined. They aren't yet well researched. We don't know what the extent and the cause is. Josh Tucker from NYU talked about some research recently. I don't think they've released it yet, so I'm probably not supposed to say this, but it's out there anyway, where he said that they looked at, I think, 1,500 or thereabouts of the worst of the fake news, awful stuff, and they asked, who's sharing this on Facebook, okay? And what are all of our interventions about this? All of our interventions is those kids today, they're sharing this shit. Well, guess what? It's not the kids. It's white men over 65. The kids are fine. It's grandpa and dad who are fucking up the world. Oh, sorry.
We're on TV.
That's okay. It's totally fine.
All right. And so the interventions, we're doing the wrong interventions. So I was in the room when this occurred, and one of the researchers said, "Oh, I need to work with AARP." Right? So I think we're making a lot of assumptions and presumptions about what's going on. There are bad actors, unquestionably. They are financially motivated. They are psychologically motivated. That's to say trolls. They're politically motivated. That's to say Russians and propagandists. It's a small number of them, and they are taking advantage of the weakness in Western democracy, which is that we care about information.
But they're also taking advantage of the algorithm, right? I mean, they've learned that certain things will be shared by certain people, will go viral or whatever you want to call it. Facebook's algorithm prefers certain things. That's where the theory of the filter bubble came from. It prefers emotion, strong emotion. So, they weaponize that algorithm.
Right, so we think it's all different. So I went today to, I think it's called 10 Editions, used bookstore. I now love to go to used bookstores up on Spadina. I got this book from, I think, 1918, called The Profession of Journalism, in which H.L. Mencken
Any tips?
talks about, well, yes. So he talks about the view of the journalist to the public. I'm going to read just a few lines, if I may.
Sure, yeah.
He, the public, sorry about the sexist, but it's 1919, he is very responsive to emotional suggestion, particularly when it's crudely and violently made. And it is to this weakness that the newspapers must ever address their endeavors. In brief, they must try to arouse his horror, or indignation, or pity, or simply his lust for slaughter. Once they have done that, they have him safely by the nose.
Good advice.
He will follow blindly until his emotion wears out. He will be ready to believe anything, however absurd, so long as he is in the state of psychic tumescence.
Wow.
We are in a state of psychic tumescence now.
Wow. Somebody needs to tweet
Wow.
that,
And
right?
by the way,
I know.
as an American, I must say, I apologize to
Are we
you
allowed
all.
to say tumescence?
I know, yeah.
So we think we're new. We think it's different. In
Right.
Gutenberg years, it's 1474. We're figuring
is-
this out.
But
We
it
don't
is
know
different.
yet.
It is different. It's different.
In certain ways.
It's
that
different in
doesn't
terms
mean
of
it's new.
scale. I mean, there was no information distribution entity, or even all the entities put together that was
Matthew,
as large as Facebook.
Erasmus complained that all these books would clutter our minds
know.
and mess us all up.
I know, and he was right.
And princes and popes tried to control the press.
Right.
And what's happening now? An effort by institutions to control speech. It is hopeless. We have to figure out society around this. And I welcome the idea that we have a diversity of voices we've never had. We talk about trying to restore trust in journalism, and I've had people properly scold me if I use that phrase to say there are a lot of people on this continent who never trusted media because they were not represented, they were not served, they were not heard. They weren't in the newsrooms, they weren't sources of stories, they weren't represented, their communities weren't served. And so I have to welcome the speech that occurs. I have to say that we as journalists have to listen. I started a program in social journalism at CUNY and entrepreneurial journalism at CUNY. And with my colleagues, the thing that I have learned most is what we teach is listening, not interviewing. Interviewing is about filling in the blanks of the story we already have. Truly listening in an anthropological method of evidence and understanding communities and their needs in entirely new ways before we can imagine what the journalism is we bring. So, fake news, real quickly. Yeah, it's screwed up. And yes, we have to, the problem was that the technologists were too damn optimistic, and I was one of them. And we did not understand how these tools would be manipulated to bad ends by bad actors. And so, but we see now the potential for a flight to quality. Google last April said that they would account for the authority, reliability, and quality of sources in search results. Facebook, having thrown out public content because it got them in trouble, is now trying to pull back quality news content, and I'm among those trying to help define what quality news is, not an easy task. Twitter is working on its role in the quality of the public conversation. So the platforms have realized that as much as they avoided it, they must make choices. They must make judgments. And I think that we in journalism have to help them make those judgments.
But I mean, even if so there's a bunch of things. Even if we are helping, it's still, in Facebook's case, you've got a private corporation run fundamentally by a single individual who controls all of the shares and all of the votes, or enough to control the company, deciding what quality information is for 2 billion people.
Fine.
That's not a problem. That's not a problem we have ever had before.
In this nation of less than 2 million people, you have one company, Jay and I used to be advisors, we're not anymore, Post Media, that controls most of the newspapers with a small group of people owned by hedge funds that are making those same decisions. And that's always been the case. It's hard for us to argue in controlling big media, where we decided what the stories were, we decided who we talked to, we decided who got heard, that Facebook is more controlling than we were? No, it's not.
It's larger than every newspaper company that's ever
I'll say this to you, Matt.
existed.
Without
And television
Twitter
company
and Facebook, we would not have had Me Too. We would not have had Black Lives Matter. Most important to me, we wouldn't have had Living While Black. Right? As a white American who tries to understand this, and I don't, because I have not lived it and never will, the idea that you can be barbecuing and your neighbors can call the police on you, which could be a death sentence for you, that we didn't know that. The media didn't cover that. Media didn't make that a story. The only way it became a story is because social media enabled the people who were never heard to be heard. And so now you have the institutions trying to, again, tamp down and say, shut up. We are the ones who talk. That's what I saw on that journalist today on Twitter, and that's why I get pissed off.
And I totally agree that some of the frustration is about a loss of control. Media used to control things and now doesn't. But I think also there are concerns about the role that Facebook plays, and in particular, when it comes to choosing the information you see, it does the things you're describing in that book. It focuses on things that inflame passions. It doesn't focus, so when they're talking about quality, and there were Facebook people at Newsgeist, as you know, they were talking about how they rank whether an experience is enjoyable or not. They rank it based on whether you spend more time there, whether you click, whether you share. That might not actually be the best
I
way
agree.
of measuring
I
quality
agree.
information.
The core of this, the absolute core of this, is the corruption of the business model. And I'm a capitalist, and I'm still in favor of advertising. I tried to convince the correspondent guys to take some. They won't do it.
They said no.
They said no. But I still believe that if we don't have advertising, we're going to have journalists starving. I believe in this. But an attention-based business model is fundamentally corrupting. It inevitably leads to clickbait, cats and Kardashians, and eventually to Donald Trump.
But that's Facebook.
It's also CNN.
Yeah. I would agree.
CNN polarized America. CNN had that business model. CNN had Crossfire. CNN had all those sins. I'm not saying that gets Facebook off the hook. What I am saying is it is a shared business model, and we've got to work on new business models. So I had a conversation with someone at Facebook some time ago, not official, just somebody who was there. Facebook is now enabling, they're doing an experiment, and knowing Facebook, they could, just tomorrow decide, screw it. But it's an experiment of enabling people, media companies, to charge for groups. So imagine if you go to a membership view where they have a mechanism where I'm not paying for the media, I'm not paying for the content, I'm paying to support my club. And maybe the media company is also there and is also helping. The metrics around that become entirely different. It's not about attention and clicks. It's about the value you put in that community. Can we build business models built on value? We don't do it now. We don't in media, and Facebook doesn't either.
But it's still fundamentally controlled by Facebook. It's not controlled by, so they decide who sees your group in the feed. They decide, and they could decide a week from now, just like they did with video, well, we changed our minds.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that anymore.
They will argue, it's a tautological argument, it's not a good argument. They will argue that you decide because they follow what you want. That's a tautological argument because it goes to what you just said about the metrics they choose to look at are the wrong metrics. Right. They say, and I've written this publicly, they say that they now want to shift from time spent to meaningful interactions between people. Right. And I said that's the wrong structure because that shifts you from clickbait to comment bait. And I believe they've got to shift to a deeper definition of community.
It's also incredibly hard to measure. What's meaningful? How do they determine?
They're trying to figure that out, and they don't know, and we don't know either, and that's why I argue that we've got to do it together. Rather than just saying, you screwed up the world, you fix it. They didn't really screw it up. We had a big part in that. We all had a role in that, and we all should be working on that together. But that's my kind of kukukuchu, kumbaya moment.
Okay. Vivian, do you have any thoughts about Facebook and Google? Should we be working with them? Should we shun them?
Yes.
Should we?
No.
Did they destroy our industry?
No. The simplest thing I can say, and the least controversial. Well, I don't say least controversial. The clearest thing I can say is no. We should not shun them, and yes, we need to be working with them. However, I adore this man, but I disagree with him in many places. And I agree that we are and of course, I'll just say, of course, that, there's a good with the bad, and the good that people, yes, Me Too and Black Lives Matter, and all of those things were enabled. But I think the fundamental business model, which is to keep people on Facebook as long as possible, to keep them engaged, to keep things cycling through. That the algorithm is designed around that, and it does feed our worst instincts, and that there was and
it's very exploitable.
Yes, and it was a deep naivete that really is only sort of, until recently begun to break around the ways that this platform can be gamed. And I think it's shameful, frankly, that Facebook did not, even when it was right before their eyes, did not see what was happening. And I'm a little... they're saying they want to fix these things. I would like to see a little more action. I still think that I don't know that it's possible, because I think the fundamental way that Facebook is structured works in complete contrast to the kinds of things they would need to do to make Facebook a healthier place.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I'm asking.
Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah.
I did a radio show, a Canadian radio show once. They said, get in there and interrupt. And I pissed off all the Canadians because I interrupted. I'm sorry, I'm being American.
You just said I'm sorry, so that's very Canadian.
Yeah, so that's very Canadian. Good job.
I don't disagree. And I've talked to people like Deb Roy at MIT who say maybe it can't be fixed, maybe it's inherent. But isn't that the same with the ad-supported media model?
We can.
Yeah, we're not saying that.
I can dump on that too.
We're not saying existing
That's why
newspapers
we're doing
are,
civil.
and we're not saying that
So,
the
yeah.
newspaper
No.
world
Yes,
was some
completely.
kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
beautiful
Right.
past, that we should go back to.
Because the
But
media
that-
people act like they're all virtuous.
No. I'm with you there.
Okay. So we
But some of
agree.
the things, yes, we agree on that. But some of the things that are happening, I mean, if you do a deep dive into things that are happening in communities where Facebook is the internet, what's happening in Myanmar, what you're seeing in
yeah.
Philippines. We were with Maria Ressa, several of us this past weekend, who's an incredibly brave journalist operating out of the Philippines, and the impact of Facebook on, and the misinformation that's coming through Facebook, which is really the almost sole source for many people of news and information, is devastating. And Facebook has not heretofore really paid enough attention to that. They say now they will.
She
I
said
would
it's
like to
getting
see
better,
it.
but they didn't
Yes.
even have the people who could understand the culture.
Right.
Yeah, and I think in Myanmar there was like one person
Right.
on the ground, and literally people are dying
Right.
because of things that are being spread on Facebook, and
This is
the
the
people
problem.
spreading them know how to pull all the levers, know how to get the information shared, and the main way is by making people mad. I remember Jonah Peretti at BuzzFeed saying, people don't share things because they're true. People don't share things because they share them because they feel mad or because they feel happy or so emotion. And Facebook just seems to feed on that. And people who
Like
know
your little
that
book.
can
Yeah,
weaponize
Like
yeah.
a
it.
book,
Yeah.
like a tabloid.
Yeah. So how do we solve that problem?
Jay's got
You got 10 minutes.
yeah.
Jay, do you have any?
Well, I used to be where Jeff is.
And then you matured.
Now you
saw the light.
graduated.
Then you grew up.
The most famous words ever written about freedom of the press are in the U.S. Constitution. Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of the press. But the second most famous words ever written about freedom of the press, at least in the American tradition, were A.J. Liebling's line, freedom of the press belongs to those who own one, which is a very important idea. Freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. And the reason that I was once where Jeff was is because the internet and companies like Facebook, but also WordPress and
Bloggers.
Twitter and
Twitter.
blogging and
Yeah.
the whole social media
Like a printing
revolution
press.
changed that fact and gave everyone a printing press. And that was a really important thing because when I started as a journalism educator in 1986, it was very common for the dean of the journalism school to get up there on the first day of class to welcome the new recruits and say something like, journalism is the only profession mentioned in the First Amendment. They would say this, and everybody in journalism agreed with this. And I always thought this was so weird because I had read the First Amendment.
Does it say journalism?
I read it many times, and it doesn't actually refer to an occupational group known as journalists. It says freedom of the press. But the reason that they thought that is that they had talked themselves in to the idea that the press was something owned by professional journalists, which is a bad idea and constitutionally mistaken.
Incorrect.
And it was the rise of social media that showed that the press belongs to the public. And freedom of the press belongs to the public.
But now it
And that
belongs
was
to
an
Mark
important, vital, and heroic thing that the internet did. So that's why I was with Jeff. But
He got corrupted.
since
He
then,
got led astray.
Since then, I've become extremely concerned about what Facebook especially, but not only Facebook, is doing to the public square. And there's a number of reasons why it's doing these things. The first is it's a very young company. And by young, I don't mean it's only been around since 2004. I mean it is run by young, irresponsible people who do not know what they're doing. It's like giving the keys to a 17-year-old or giving a mortgage to a college student.
Get off my lawn.
They don't know what they literally don't know what they're doing in the sense that they've built a machine, Facebook, that is so big and so complex in its interactions with the society that nobody actually knows what is going on with it. And so they can't, in a sense, they can't be responsible, they can't be accountable, because they literally do not know what their creation is doing.
I feel like you're right. I feel like it's larger even than Mark Zuckerberg ever imagined.
Yeah, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than them. It's bigger than any system they have for controlling it.
Yeah.
But another thing that I think we now see about Facebook that I didn't see clearly in the beginning is that it is a system for approaching truth from the demand side. This is what I mean, from the demand side. Here. And what I mean is Facebook is incredibly effective and efficient at surfacing the demand for something to be true. So there was, in the United States, a demand among a lot of people that Barack Obama not be a U.S. citizen. A lot of people wanted that to be the case. He is a U.S. citizen, but a lot of people want him not to be a U.S. citizen. And Facebook is incredibly effective at surfacing demand for things to be true and incentivizing public actors to spread those untruths, and then allows money to be made off of that. And I don't think the people who run the company appreciate that. It's an unintended consequence of what they were trying to do. They're too immature to face up to it.
I found it staggering that Mark Zuckerberg in an interview said that when asked about misinformation and the impact of that and trolls and so on in the election, he basically said for 10 years, we didn't think about that.
Yeah.
We didn't think about the potential negative effects of this massive machine that we were building. 10 years.
Right.
These are the smartest people in Silicon Valley.
I must return to Herr Gutenberg. He didn't know that he would help lead to the 30 Years' War.
Yeah. He wasn't that bright, though. I mean,
he was a little older. I guess maybe that's better. We could be going. I think it's not. I think we're focusing on Facebook, and I don't disagree with any of your criticisms of Facebook.
and it could apply to YouTube.
My argument is only that
Yeah,
we should help them. Because they are powerful. The public is there. The public we want to serve is there. We got to deal with that. That's my only argument there.
But isn't that like the chicken helping the fox? I mean, aren't we? What are we helping them to?
What's your choice?
What
so
are we
you're
helping
ignore
them to
2
do?
billion people. You're going to turn off 2 billion people and say, no, you know what? If you're like that journalist at the Wall Street Journal, if you're dumb enough to be on Facebook, I don't care about you.
Well, there's using them, but then there's helping them. So it's possible to use
Helping
them
them to
without
help
helping them.
Helping them to help
Helping them do what?
to serve better news. So what happened was, so here's the
They
anecdotes.
don't want to serve better news. What are you talking about?
So after the election.
They want to serve better ads.
After the election. same as Les Moonves did at CBS, same as Jeff Zucker does at CNN.
Jay's got a point. I'm not convinced they even care
Well, there
about
are people in.
better
They
news.
care about avoiding.
I think some people within Facebook do.
Yes.
I'm not
Of
convinced
course,
that the
yeah.
people who matter do.
Well, let me give you a little different perspective.
They care
Because-
about not being in trouble and not being regulated.
That's right.
So Congress
They
made
care
them
about
care.
criticism,
Right.
not news.
And PR.
So let me go to Google and Facebook real quickly together. So Google called me and other people after the election, kind of said, "No," and their view was that Google was a mirror to the world. They said features like, well,
That's
you
ridiculous.
laugh,
That's ridiculous.
you laugh. No, wait a second, you laugh, but we say the same thing in journalism. We say we're a mirror to the world. Don't
But
blame
we
us
know
for
we're
those
lying.
problems. Yeah, we're lying.
Yeah.
Right? So.
We know that's just.
So let me just. So they said features like Jews are autocomplete comes up with bad stuff. We'll fix that. But search results that's holy. That's a reflection of the world. And I said no. I said you've got to recognize the manipulation that occurs in the weaknesses in your system, and you've got to measure it, and you've got to be honest about it, and you've got to compensate for it. That's what leads to judgment. And it wasn't because of me, they were thinking about this stuff, but that's why last April they said that they would thenceforth account for the authority, reliability, and quality of searches in search results. The quick example is this. If your search was climate change, you got shit. Crap. I actually got kicked off the BBC for saying crap. You got bad results. If your search was, is climate change real? I'm sorry, turn it around. If your search was climate change, you got good results. If your search was, is climate change real, you got bad results. because they valued relevance, and people who were dumb enough to ask that question were dumb enough to click on those things and they rose. So Google realized it had to compensate for that manipulation. So I said to them afterwards, this means you're siding with science. And they said yes. They're making decisions. They never did for all their time. They realized they have to. Facebook's problem was, I heard from somebody we brought into an event at my school, they didn't know what news, they still don't know what news is. They saw social content and public content. And they had no idea the difference between the New York Times and Vladimir's lying Russian blog. They still don't. So they kind of shoved out the public content. They do, in fact, want to bring back quality news content.
Do they?
They don't, yeah, I believe they do. And I also believe they don't know what news is and they don't know what quality is. And that's why I believe we need to help them do that.
Yeah, I don't buy it. One thing Facebook has helped me to understand is what an editorial company is. And they are not in any way an editorial company, and they're not capable of being one. And an editorial company is a company built in a certain way. It's a very unusual thing. It's not like any other kind of business. It's built first for independent judgment.
Right.
It sells its own judgment to users, to readers, and generates trust from that. It's also built sometimes to work against itself in that it has to publish things that are not necessarily good for it as a business. It's built to withstand criticism and to, a sense, not care that it gets criticized because it knows it's going to get criticized. And none of those features of an editorial company are present in Facebook. So when we ask Facebook to do things that are editorial, like surface quality news, we're actually asking for something that's impossible for it to do, and that if it takes that responsibility on, it will probably distort it and warp it and screw it up. So I am not with you that they care about quality news, and I don't want them to care more about quality news, because it's like asking Goliath to care about David. It's not going to happen.
So Vivian and I were 2 days in Paris 3 weeks ago at the Reporters Without Borders, where the journalists are trying to come up with standards for what quality news is so that they can try to get the platforms to use that standard.
That's doomed.
Vivian, do you think that's worthwhile? Should we be helping them?
Helping Facebook?
Determine what quality news is.
I think
or can we help them?
I think we should be engaged with Facebook. Yes, I absolutely think, yes, I 100% think we should be engaging with Facebook. That said, because it is a platform, as Jeff said, 2.3 billion monthly active users, this is a big deal. We cannot ignore it. I don't think that Facebook is motivated to provide quality news. I don't see just even the leadership that they have there. They do not have quality journalism leadership. I think there are a few individuals there who care deeply. It's not about people, but at executive level, I see no evidence. But we can't ignore it. So we have to try to help them / hold their feet to the fire. We have no choice. I think just saying, you're bad, we're not going to engage is a mistake. We also need to help fortify alternatives to Facebook, which is a lot of what, it's what Jay is doing with Correspondent, it's what we're trying to do with Civil. I mean, we can't ignore that it's a reality today, but we need to sort of build up the capability that there are other ways that people are going to discover news except for Facebook.
So before we get to questions, I wanted to ask each of you, so there seems to be a debate about whether, so maybe there was misinformation on Facebook, but there wasn't that much of it. It didn't really impact people that much, is one view.
Undeniable.
So it didn't have an impact on the election, for example. The opposite view is it swung the election. Facebook and misinformation are the reason Donald Trump was elected. Go.
So, well, first of all, there's no question it had an impact on the electorate. Did it swing the election? It is impossible to know. But there is absolutely no impact. This is statistically, the data shows that that tens of millions of people engaged with content that was outright false. The number one, so fellow Canadian Craig Silverman with BuzzFeed, he did a study, this is now a little while ago, but he was able to ascertain that the number one most engaged news story on Facebook in the 6 weeks leading up to the election was a story from the Denver Guardian that said that the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump. This is a made-up news organization. This is a made-up story. And when I say, and by an engagement is a like, a comment, or a share. And when I say the #1 most engaged news story, I mean the #1 engaged news story, not #1 fake news story, #1 story in the news, anything that is happening, this is #1. Now you look at the scale of, how could that not have an impact? Did it swing the election? I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. There's no way for anybody to know. People will say that it did or it didn't, but there's no way to know the answer to that.
Jeff?
So Mr. Mencken talks about journalism's desire to find the bad guy and the enemy. I will deliver you to the bad guy who made this happen, Rupert Murdoch. Fox News, I watched my own father, who I love dearly, who I hope doesn't watch streams, be brainwashed by Fox News. I think that he is the single-handed ruination of American democracy and British democracy and Australian democracy. And the problem is, but I don't put all the fault on him, I put the fault on us in liberal media. I'm obviously liberal, and I'm media. And we ignored, in the United States, we ignored half the country. We didn't even admit to them we were liberal. They couldn't trust us to say that, they couldn't trust us to say anything. And we left a void that was filled entirely by Rupert Murdoch and Fox News, such that Gallup had numbers they released at the Online News Association a few weeks ago showing that the most trusted outlet in news, 24% to the next one down was 12%, was Fox News. Why? Because there's one conservative outlet and lots of liberal outlets. And so I actually believe, as a liberal, that we need to invest in alternative, responsible, fact-based, journalistic, conservative perspective reporting and media in the United States. Because what happens now is you have one outlet that lies constantly and that sold Trump to the country and that sold the lies of birtherism and such and that stokes the flames of hatred and polarization in a market that also does it on its own, right? Jeff Zucker and Leslie Moonves both said Trump may be bad for America, but he's good for their business. So they're not alone. But in terms of that extreme polarization of the country, I put blame going back before the internet on media in general, on talk radio, but on Rupert Murdoch.
More than Facebook?
Yes,
Jay?
unquestionably.
What Vivian said about the Denver Guardian newspaper being a story on Trump endorsing Pope is what I meant by the demand side of truth. There was demand for that story. Right. It just didn't happen to ever have happened, but Facebook was very effective at surfacing demand for that story. I think the proposition that you offered us, Matthew, Facebook was responsible for Donald Trump's win, was something cooked up by people to help Facebook escape responsibility, because it's such an extreme statement, such an overstated thing, that obviously it's untrue, and so then people shift from that to it must have been blameless.
Right.
It wasn't blameless. They don't know what their machine is doing. They don't understand what they have created, and they have no way of controlling it. But I agree with Jeff that Facebook had a huge influence on the election because so many people were cut off from the news system, alienated from it. They had left it long ago. They didn't trust it at all. They were out there sort of floating around on their own. Right. They don't have relationships with local news providers because the local news providers are all gone or of such low quality that nobody could rely on them. And it's in local news that you develop a relationship with journalists so that you understand why you need those people in the first place. And that had preceded the arrival of Facebook. And so American democracy was vulnerable to Murdoch, to Facebook, and ultimately to Trump. And so those things all happen, and to try and recover from that and say Facebook cost us the election is just sort of stupid, right? But it still can't escape responsibility.
It's interesting that Kathleen Hall Jamieson, who's a veteran researcher, just came out with a book in which she argues that it did swing the election.
Yeah.
She's not a person given to, like, she's been doing this for 50 years, I think, studying sort of human behavior. And it's interesting that her argument in a lot of cases is that the media effectively took things from Facebook and Twitter that were deliberately, intended to try and swing the election and just massively popularized them and sort of did the trolls work for them.
We're still doing it now. Every time Donald Trump tweets, should we write an entire story about that? Every breath and syllable of Obama didn't get that, right?
Yeah.
But we're chumps.
Here's another way that failures of the press led into this. Election coverage in the American model is not that different in the Canadian model. I think has been broken for a long time. What it should be based on...
Because it's based on it as a race, or...
Yeah, because it's essentially about who's going to win.
Right.
And it's a close-up on the political class and the machinations of people in the parties who are trying to win the election. And instead of finding out what do Canadians want their next election to be about and what do they want the candidates to be discussing, getting a very good handle on that, using that as the template for your coverage, right. And then trying to pressure the candidates to address the things that Canadians want them to talk about, which would be the smart and rational and civic-minded way of doing it.
That is what we do. We pretty much do that.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I think so.
Instead of that...
Jay tried to get a company to do that.
Instead of that, it's who's going to win, how are they winning, who's raising money, what are their tactics, what are the ads, what are the insiders saying, what are the polls saying. It's the game of politics. Right. And when our political press went off in that direction to focus on the game of politics, it essentially resigned. It said, voters, you're on your own.
Inform yourselves.
Yeah.
Can I just add one other thing? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
If you have a question, if we could ask you to come up to the mic. And please say your name and affiliation, and please phrase your question in the form of a question.
All right.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Did you have?
Oh no, I just wanted to say
one
other thing. One of the other things that's interesting that's happening in U.S. news media is because Donald Trump, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about Trump per se, but because Donald Trump has broken every norm of the way presidents act, the entire news industry is going through convulsions to figure out how they fit a square peg into a round hole. So, you were saying, do we covering every tweet? Well, the news media goes, well, a tweet is simply a statement from the president, and if the president says it, it's newsworthy, and therefore, I woke up when I was getting dressed this morning, I had CNN on, and all I heard was a 15-minute discussion about Donald Trump tweeting that Stormy Daniels' horse face. And I'm like, really? Why are we? It's exactly what one of you was saying, which is
Jay's very eloquent on exactly that question.
Yes, that we're feeding into,
especially the norm part.
Yes, yeah.
Because he goes beyond, sort of outside of the boundaries of sort of normal conduct, even for human beings, let alone presidents. And we just don't know how to do.
Why are we falling for that? Yeah.
And maybe we can come back to Trump. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So there may be some questions or some problems that blockchain can't fix, I guess. But I wanted to ask you, get back to that. The initial part of the discussion really interested me. My name's Teresa Ebden. I'm PR lead for Canada for Accenture. So obviously blockchain is important to us.
And I hope you're not going to ask me to explain blockchain.
No, it's okay.
You can explain blockchain.
Actually, I was going back and forth with our global blockchain innovation lead, Ileana Orris-Valentier, who happens to be Canadian. And I was asking her, can this really happen? Can you use a blockchain to bust fake news? So she came back with 3 different scenarios for blockchain and media. And I wanted to kind of put them to you and ask you if this seems reasonable for blockchain and what you're going to do next, Vivian. So blockchain and micropayments for access to news to incent journalists and publications amid declining full subscriptions. as used for evidence when it comes to documents recorded on a blockchain to prove timestamp and that they weren't tampered with. And 3, prediction-type marketplaces where people stake something of value to reduce the likelihood of fake news. So do any of those sound reasonable?
Yes.
What's most interesting, and what are you going to do next?
Yes, they're all interesting.
Okay.
You know, one of the criticisms of, that we get at Civil is, the question you always start is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And people say, well, you guys are saying it can solve this and this and this and this and this and this. And I'm like, yeah? But I'm like, well, how can it solve all those things? Well, it actually, and let me just be clear, I'm not saying, and I never will say Civil's like the solution to journalism's problems, but I think that there's a lot of interesting experiments that we will be enabling that I think could become super interesting. So the first one, you're going to have to remind me, but the first one you mentioned is micropayments.
Right.
So micropayments, which has been challenging in the past. People have talked about it, dreamed about it for years because of transaction fees on small amounts and middlemen and all of that kind of thing. When you're in a cryptocurrency world, cryptocurrency to cryptocurrency, it is completely trivial to go read a story and just without even thinking about it, just fling somebody an eighth of a token or whatever it is you want to do because you really like that story. So, it's a small amount at scale. When maybe that there's a habit that can be unlocked, that can become quite meaningful. In terms of the timestamp of stories, yes, preserving stories to the blockchain, to this sort of distributed ledger, absolutely preserves it is sort of provable. Stories can be altered, but it's like a deck of cards, right? So you have the original story with the original text and the timestamp. And then, if there's corrections that need to be happen or whatever, those are built on top. But that original one is there. That is, fingerprinted to the author, to the publisher, to the date and the time. Absolutely, and that can help protect against, everything from IP privacy to, allegations of fake news. And I can't remember what the third one is.
The third was the prediction type marketplaces.
Money.
Yeah. So staking, yes. So that's
the idea that you could put up money and say, "I want someone to write about
So that's another really interesting thing that can emerge from. So we're sort of intermingling here blockchain and crypto economics, which are related, but they're not the same thing. But in crypto economics, you can. So the civil community of token holders could stake or signal sort of an interest in an area of coverage. So a bunch of people say, I would like to, I'm going to, put down, X amount of tokens because I want to see more coverage of, I want to see coverage around, what's going to happen around the business of the marijuana industry in Canada, now newly emerging. So there's a way to sort of signal that a news organization can then take that on. It shows consumer interest. It gives you a little pot of money. Or or a new news organization could spring up. So there's a lot, and there's more interesting applications as well around signaling. So there's all kinds of dynamics.
So if we did all of these things, how would the face of media look right now in terms of our battle for the discussion of our evening, misinformation? What would happen if we did all of these things?
Yes, it would be
wonderful.
Stop.
Misinformation would stop.
No, it would be fantastic because it is, we're putting, the holy grail here is that a direct relationship between the public and news media. And that kind of interaction and that kind of mutual incentive to do the right thing.
So very much like just the correspondent. So just readers and journalists.
That part is the same.
That part, yeah. There's a lot that's different, but there is a simpatico around that part of it, absolutely.
Okay.
So.
And in general, what's Clay Shirky's great line?
Which one?
Everything could work.
Yeah.
What is it? It's
what will save journalism?
Nothing
will save journalism, but everything might.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I quoted it recently, so I have it off the top of my head.
What will work?
Maria,
nothing will work, but everything might.
Right.
I think it's Maria Bustillos, whose newsroom is on Civil, was talking about the blockchain aspect of its archives. So if Peter Thiel buys puts Gawker out
Yes,
of business
right.
or buys it, he can destroy all the archives. If they exist effectively on the
they can't
blockchain,
be
that's
destroyed,
impossible.
yeah.
Because everyone who has a copy. Go ahead.
Sure. My name is Yafeng Xu, and I'm a journalist, founder and editor-in-chief of Loving Sister. Loving Sister is an independent online media with a focus on issues related to gender equality and diversity, and also with the information for newcomers, with the context both in English and Chinese. Since it has been launched, since it was launched 6 years ago, Loving Sister has been providing fact-based and also fact-checked stories for the community, where misinformation and fake news are prevalent on social media, like WeChat. It's a Chinese language social media. And so Loving Sister has been established as an independent, professional online media with a reliable and trustworthy info for the community and beyond. But now this independent mission-driven journalist project has reached to a stage that it needs to be expanded and also made sustainable. So my question to the experts from the source is that what kind of insights or advice you could share with us if there are any workable, sustainable models in the source that can help mission-driven journalism projects like Loving Sister in Canada. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what won't work. Don't try to get the government to pay for it. That's not going to happen. Don't rely on advertisers. Facebook and Google will do it much better than you, so that's not going to happen. The most logical route for a publication like that is to be so valuable and so important to the users, to the readers, to develop a readership that is so loyal that they will support you directly in one way or another. And that is the route that a lot of publications that are like yours are taking. As we said earlier, there are sort of two main ways that you can do that. One is subscription. You pay your money, you get access to your product. The other is membership, where those who feel the strongest about it essentially subsidize it for all the others. Right? Those are the two main options. There are a few other business models that publications like yours sometimes use, but they never contribute more than 5 or 10% of costs, which would be things like events, perhaps consulting with other companies that want to understand your audience as intimately as you do. Sometimes people make some money doing that, advising others about what you know from serving that audience so well. But right now, this problem of how do we sustain serious public interest, edited, high-quality news for the publics that need it, this is the #1 unsolved problem in journalism. It's been the #1 unsolved problem in journalism for 15 years. If we knew the answer to that problem, we wouldn't be here.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Bobby Hristova. I'm a journalism student at Centennial College and the University of Toronto. Thanks. So we talked a lot about Facebook today. Facebook owns Instagram, and along with Instagram, there's Snapchat, and there are two markets I think everyone's really looking at. Is anyone looking at how there might be misinformation spread on these apps, and what are we doing about it?
There's, my big fear is WhatsApp. And we've seen certainly in Brazil, in India, in Colombia, in various countries, the problem is it's not transparent. You can't go see what it is. It's encrypted. And it's being used effectively. The bad guys are always going to be ahead of us. And they recognize the power of that platform. So I'm concerned about that. There are people looking at this. There are research efforts going on. The issue is that the bad guys are always one step ahead. When it came to financially motivated bad actors, spammers, right? Google figured that out. This weekend we were with a guy named Matt Cutts, who used to be in charge of spam at Google. You'd think he'd be the most cynical, nasty son of a bitch on earth. He's one of the nicest guys, literally, on earth. And they could tell the motive, and they could tell what was going to happen, and they could maybe they were just a half step behind, but they were on their rear end. With politically motivated and psychologically motivated stuff in these new platforms where you can't see it, it's worse. My view of these days is we can't tamp down and control speech. That will be a losing battle. The question is how we inoculate the public, which one would think is the job of journalism. We don't know how to do that. How do we recognize the behavior of the bad guys so that we can cut them off? Twitter just yesterday finally released all of the IRA, the Russian accounts and everything they did. We need research like this. We've got to figure out what they're doing. When we know these accounts are out there, the platforms have to share it more. Researchers have to get data. They're not getting enough. They're getting more now than they used to, but they're not getting enough. Yeah, I'm very concerned about that.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Anne. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Toronto, and I'm also the associate news editor at The Varsity, which is U of T's student newspaper. So I was wondering, what advice would you give to young journalists breaking into the industry in the age of quote-unquote fake news and declining print media?
Besides coming to CUNY or NYU?
Great question.
Yeah.
I'll take that one. My advice for young journalists is to get yourself into an authentically journalistic situation. And this is what I mean by that. The best way to learn what journalism is all about is when you're covering something, a story, a niche, a beat, a subject that some people care a lot about, such that they begin to depend on you for news. And they want to know what you have to say when something happens on that beat. And it doesn't matter so much how many people you're in that situation with. What matters is being relied upon by real people for news in something that they care about. Now, it's really easy in a campus situation to do that because you have small communities that care about certain things. There's stuff to cover. I started my journalism career as editor of a college paper, so I know how that works. And that is the richest and most instructive experience you can have, is when something happens and everybody wants to know what you have on it because you are the person who's covering that better than anyone else. And if you can get yourself into a situation like that, you'll learn everything you need to know about real journalism.
Can you make money doing that?
Yeah. I told you that's an unsolved problem.
Yeah.
So before we get to, there was a question, I think, from Twitter. How are newsrooms that are predominantly white and male failing at tackling misinformation about issues like race, white nationalism, and sexual assault?
The answer is yes.
How are they failing?
No, I understand. But newsrooms are failing. And it is, the answer is, the beginning of the answer is complicated, but the beginning of the answer has to do with the diversity of those newsrooms. There is no possible way that news organizations can effectively cover issues around diverse populations and gender populations without having diverse newsrooms at people at various levels. That's just a fact. And so, diversity, and it is a great frustration in 2018, the lack of, never mind lack of diversity, lack of transparency that, from news organizations about their diversity of their newsrooms. And I think that lack of transparency, if you're not going to be transparent, then there's really only one answer as to why you're not willing to be transparent.
There was an industry organization
Yes.
that asked its members, I forget which one.
ASDE.
Yeah, for diversity.
Right.
And they couldn't get
and
answers.
something
They
like
couldn't get answers.
Can I add something on
12%
this?
responded.
Yeah.
The diversity project in American newsrooms is at least 20 years old, maybe longer. And it has not produced results.
No.
We're still talking about it pretty much at the same levels. So it's possible that the reason for that is that the people in charge just don't care and they're not trying. But it might be a little bit deeper than that. And this is my hypothesis. Nobody likes this idea. Nobody wants to talk about it. But here's a thought about it. There's a contradiction at the heart of the diversity project in American journalism. I don't know if it's different in Canada. The contradiction is this. People are hired from various communities, racial minorities, out of the way places culturally. They are hired into the newsroom under the assumption that their perspective is needed. And when they get there, they find what they're supposed to do is learn how to report the news by taking their perspective out of it. There is a contradiction between the logic of the diversity project and what I have called the view from nowhere. And those two things cannot actually peacefully coexist. And the people in charge wanted both. They wanted to keep the view from nowhere, and they wanted to have a diverse newsroom. And those two things are in conflict, and nobody wants to deal with it.
But even if you accept the view from nowhere, sorry, I just want to say something. I think you're right. But I would also say, but even if you stipulate that that a newsroom takes a view from nowhere, which I understand, it is not just about taking a point of view. It's about also recognizing stories that we don't necessarily recognize.
That's true.
Yeah.
But when you ask people to come into a newsroom and contribute their perspective, their membership in a community, their background, the way they see the world, the sensibility that they bring that is missing, and the reigning philosophy in that newsroom is to privilege news judgment that eliminates those
I think
things.
you're right.
You have a problem, and it creates frustration.
One thought to add to this is that we work hard on what we call the pipeline, which is a horrible expression, of getting students, diverse students out of the newsrooms. When they get to those newsrooms, they hit a ceiling, inevitably. They're not being listened to for that and many other reasons. I think that Lord knows it's important to have diversity in the newsroom. It's important for newsrooms to measure themselves on their sources of representation in the communities they serve, but they're only going to go so far. We have to learn from 20 years. Another answer, not the answer, but another answer has to be ownership, and that's entrepreneurship. And so when you talk about serving Chinese community and newcomers in Canada, make a business out of that, own it, because you have a perspective that the Globe and Mail, as hard as they try, can't have, because they can't do everything. Right. So in an ecosystem in the internet, you have a role.
Paul?
Yeah, my name's Paul Knox. I'm a retired journalist and journalism professor. And my question concerns the fact that we're talking about an enormous social problem. And normally the way we deal with social problems is in a way that governments have some kind of role, especially if the social problem might be as big as foreign power intervening in our domestic affairs to swing an election, that kind of thing, or the rise of neo-Nazi, whatever you want to call them, movements, unchecked by the distribution of their stuff on social media, without in any way wanting to abrogate the First Amendment or control speech or meddle in speech at all. It still strikes me as really, really strange that we are effectively depending on about a dozen people in Silicon Valley, our ability to persuade them to solve this problem themselves in a way that doesn't threaten their own business interests. Isn't this a little bit ridiculous? Isn't there a role for government?
Is there a role for government?
In some way? In the United States, we have a little bit different perspective in Canada. But isn't this crazy?
You have a better government.
Well,
The problem in the United States is the government is the problem. Now in Europe, they've been regulating a lot, and it's all well-intentioned, well, most of it is, but the unintended consequences, I think, are problematic. Netzday gay hate speech law in Germany means that satire is all but dead in Germany because you have to kill everything that might get you in the least possible trouble. And I could go on, and I won't. I'm going to sound libertarian right now. I'm not. I'm a Hillary Clinton Democrat. But I am worried about my government. I hate saying that. And I'm worried about the track record we've seen from regulation thus far. I've been talking to regulators. I think there's new interventions they can make. So I don't disagree with you. There's a role. But the role of saying, we got the answer, let's regulate, is not working so far.
thanks.
The same people that are creating the problem that only a government can solve are also creating the mistrust in the government that would solve it.
Well
See
said.
how that works?
I do.
Yeah.
Do we have another question?
I don't
I know.
Just charge up to the mic.
Oh.
I thought you had a line.
Just-
Oh, no, I think they were just hanging
Just
out by the
following
bar.
up on that, could you comment on Sinclair and the failure of antitrust to break
Oh,
up those
somebody should
sort
cover
of
that.
monopolies?
Wow, what a country! What a company! I've been writing about Sinclair for
And what a
15
country.
years, and they are a remarkable creation of American business and American law. So Sinclair is the largest owner of local television stations in the United States. Getting larger and trying to get even bigger than it is now. And they are a right-wing company with a leadership that's family-based, highly ideological company, which is extremely unusual in local TV because local TV tries to address itself to the entire community. Every local TV station calls itself Tulsa's #1 station for news and Dallas's, relied upon broadcaster. And this company operates with an ideological agenda, but instead of alerting the viewers that this is Sinclair, it actually comes to you as an affiliate of CBS, NBC, ABC. So people think they're watching local version of CBS News when actually they're watching something centrally controlled from Sinclair headquarters in Baltimore. And so it's not just that they're an ideologically driven news organization, it's that they are completely opaque to the viewer because you can't even tell by watching it that you are watching Sinclair. And so there's no way to be on guard for what Sinclair's agenda is. And they are extremely unusual because this way of doing news where you're kind of risking alienation of part of the audience by being so ideologically driven is not commercially the best strategy, has never been commercially the best strategy. And so this is another uncontrolled experiment we're enjoying in the United States, and nobody has any idea what to do about it except to describe it as I just did.
We're sorry.
Yeah.
It's a disaster.
Yeah.
So we have time for one more question.
Okay.
One more
Or
question,
is there- oh,
unfortunately. So please make it brief.
Yep. Hi, my name is George. I'm a guy off the street. I heard there's going to be booze and free snacks, so
Yeah.
I figure I'd blend in and. No, I'm kidding.
You're
I've been
standing in
looking
the way
forward
of
to
everybody
this.
in the booth and free snacks.
I've been looking forward to this for
Yeah.
quite a while to hear from the gurus. I don't know who the guy on the left is. Obviously, he doesn't know anything. He only asks questions. No, I'm kidding. I'm a Mathew fanboy. But anyways, my question, and it is a
We can
serious
talk
one.
later.
What?
We can talk later.
Yeah, okay. My question actually is, and I don't have hard data on this, but there seems to be a trend for journalists and other media makers, whether they voluntarily or not, to move away from practicing the craft and going to teach at colleges and universities. Hey, Jeff, nothing,
Red
because it
flag.
pays more.
Oh, no, it doesn't.
No, I don't think it does.
Oh,
For
no, it doesn't.
for most journalists today, in terms of what they make, I think the teaching gig is more lucrative. No?
Would you agree with that, Jay?
That it pays more? No, not in our environment. But that's always happened. I mean, that's...
Yeah, oh, sure. Yeah, it just seems to be accelerating because the industry is contracting.
Well, journalism is shedding jobs, but it's not like journalism schools are adding jobs.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so let me get to my question, which
Okay.
actually...
I thought that was the question.
No, that was an observation. So my question is, with professional or real journalists having less and less influence about the news and the fake news and all that, is it maybe time to consider teaching the news, not just in the walled gardens of university and colleges, but where people go to get their news, like Facebook or Twitter or what else is out there? I'm not sure, but just wanted to know if you have any thoughts on that, of some kind of a maybe even centralized, but likely it will be decentralized because that's how information flows these days.
Do you mean like media literacy or?
Well, media literacy sounds too academic and, the world's changed in terms of what media is today. So, but it would be part of that, but more like dealing with a contemporary situation of people not knowing what's what.
You mean teaching the public or teaching Facebook?
The public. No. I don't have any faith in the institutions.
Yeah.
I'm talking about reaching the people where they are. And leveraging credentials and a history to help them better understand the news, or even to teach them how to do the news, because they're doing it anyways, whether it's legit or not.
So
anyways, I've gone on too long.
Journalism instruction, but on Facebook or Twitter.
I don't have much hope for that. I mean,
you kind of do it already, though, don't you?
Well, I try, sure, but to have a mass effect in that way, I don't see that. It might be desirable. I don't see it as very practical. I mean, we can't even teach math.
There are a lot of efforts out there like that. None of them have really gotten much traction, and research indicates that there's not much trust around that. There's a deep suspicion about, what the motivation, and people are sort of, already in their camps of which media they're going to trust. It's difficult to break through.
I would recommend to you a talk by Dana Boyd, who started Dana Boyd, who started Data in Society. She did a talk at South by Southwest EDU on media literacy. And she argues that a couple things.
We only have time for one thing.
That I talk really fast from New York.
Okay.
She argues that we did such a good job of teaching our kids to question things. They question everything. And listen to what I said before about that research that said the kids aren't the problem. It's grandpa and dad who are the problem. My pat line here is that media literacy is too media-centric, too egotistical from our perspective, that we have to make journalists more public-centric. That if they understood the public better, if they listened to the public better, if they built relationships of trust with the public better, I think that may be a more effective way to work, but we don't know.
Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody. Great session.
Thanks. I'm afraid that slightly depressing note to end on, but we.
As opposed to the rest of it was
actually,
so
the
cheerful.
whole evening has been pretty depressing. But please thank our guests, and Natalie, if you want to come up and say a few words.
Thanks, Matthew. We've been treated to an outstanding hour and a half of discussion and some lively debate. On behalf of the CJF, I'd like to thank Vivian Schiller, Jeff Jarvis, and Jay Rosen for sharing their insights on the state of media and some examples of vital experimentation in the industry. And our thanks as well to Mathew Ingram for the work he put into leading tonight's discussion. Now, before I let you go to the cocktail reception, I have a very short CJF commercial previewing our upcoming J-Talks. We have some amazing speakers on deck, and we hope you'll join us. So on November 4th, we are joined by the investigative journalist of the year who keeps landing bombshell after bombshell, and he just turned 30. Ronan Farrow is in Toronto for a conversation with Robin Doolittle. And I don't think there are tickets left, but we'll be offering a live stream for that event. And on November 8th, we're joined by another journalistic powerhouse, Suzanne Craig, and she's also a fellow Canadian, who'll be here to talk about how Trump got rich and the story behind her massive investigation that was in the New York Times this month. And on November 29th, we have a Canadian exclusive. Venerable former editor of The Guardian, Alan Rusbridger, is in town for a book launch to talk about his new book, Breaking News, and what it means for journalism in North America and globally. You can have a look at our social media for details on these events, and we hope to see you there. And on behalf of the CJF, I'd like to thank all of you for being with us tonight and for supporting our work. We hope you'll stick around to meet our panel and continue this conversation at the cocktail reception. Thank you so much.